Time now for Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. Joining us tonight, the Independent's Miguel Delaney and Martin Hardy from The Times. Welcome to you both, gents. Let's quickly run through the Back Pages, starting with The Times. Leicester to avoid points deduction, white ball job for McCullum, and Lord's rebuild to be delayed. That's a building story regarding the home of cricket. Metro back page, busy Baz, Brendan McCullum with a couple of jobs now. Jack's back and guarding Angel Gomez, that is. Star back page, Aston thriller. That's a PSR-related story too. Baz signs up for dual role. I back page, McCullum to take charge of England white ball teams. I need to count laps. And Fox's win appeal against Premier League charge. Some back page, Manuel Ugarte headlines, fight for your right to party, he says. Cole, Phil and Ollie are 3 Lions out. Fox's point joy and Villa Prem Fury. PSR2 stories there. Express, a dream believer. Jack Draper heading into the US Open quarterfinals. Leicester win their legal fight. Baz glad to unify England. And the Telegraph front page of the sports supplement, really serious story. The fight for justice. Gus Atkinson starred for England, while the man who killed his mother in a horrific car crash was jailed after extradition struggle. Well, gents, let's start with Leicester City, back page of The Times. Miguel, come to you because you've written a piece which will flash up momentarily, I'm sure, for The Independent. But The Times headline, Leicester to avoid points deduction, club win PSR appeal in blow to Premier League. Miguel, what are the key points and what are the possible repercussions?
Well, I mean, the main consequence is that despite expectation that they could have a punishment that would change the table and maybe say the survival battle, Leicester are going to escape points deduction this season. So that will change, I suppose, maybe the outlook of the campaign. And that is ultimately down to a technicality. And it's interesting, in Leicester's own statements, they spoke about raising flaws how the case exposed flaws in the drafting of Premier League rules. Because what it ultimately came down to was, in March 2023, Leicester informed the Premier League they're going to change their financial year, as they can do. There's absolutely nothing untoward about that. From the end of May to the end of June. And now their argument was that was to allow to meet PSO obligations in the first place through player trading. But what actually happened in practice then was, when they went down, it meant there was almost this kind of limbo period between relegation and, I suppose, the legal start of next season. Given they were no longer shareholders in the Premier League, the appeals panel actually went against the decision made by the independent panel and ruled that by that point they'd fallen out of the Premier League's jurisdiction. Now, from what I've been told, and to be fair, what the Premier League's own statement reflected, where they declared themselves disappointed, outside the Premier League, among its clubs and in the Championship as well, it's provoked fury, from what I've heard. And even that point, I mean, Leicester's argument, they said in their statement about how this is ultimately down to application of English law, down to the wording, how there shouldn't be any room for interpretation. That's all extremely fair. Others would say that the Sheffield Wednesday case established a precedent where business common sense should be applied to these situations. I think why the Premier League declared themselves disappointed, because, I mean, I suppose people even listening to these details will look to the reality of the situation. It ultimately came down to a very small window where Leicester were outside the jurisdiction, despite the Premier League independent panel previously concluding that they'd breached PSR limits. And just as a wider point, before I let Martin speak on this, I suppose, it did strike me kind of as we were preparing this. Usually what moves social media, or when people respond to headlines, things like that, is stuff like transfers, obviously big results. But now PSR stories do. And obviously a lot of this is related to kind of the ability of clubs to compete and who thinks they're fairly dealt with. But it does point to this this new era the Premier League is moving into in terms of kind of legal cases and potential fallout, and where, you know, off pitch could be just as influential to the table as on pitch. And as was put to me today, a lot of clubs who have faced investigations will be looking very keenly at how Leicester got out of this on essentially a technicality.
Making it over a technicality, Martin, what are the repercussions as well then for clubs threatened by relegation? Spend big, and if you go down, don't worry about it? Or do you expect the Premier League to move swiftly to rewrite the rules?
Well, we'll have to see what the Premier League do next. This is not a good evening for them. You know, they've got a world title fight coming up against Man City at the end of the year, and they did not expect to lose this one to Leicester today. I think Martin Samuel at my paper at the time said about 6 months ago that the most important signings clubs will be making from now would be accountants and lawyers. I think he's been proven right today. If you were keeping an eye on the end of June with clubs like Newcastle and Nottingham Forest desperately trying to balance their books and avoid PSR, you could see that there was a problem because the likes of Liverpool were recording their accounts for the end of May, and these clubs were doing it for the end of June. So you instantly had an anomaly into that perhaps lawyers could jump into. And Nick DeMarco, who's represented Leicester on this, is obviously flavour of the month with Leicester fans on Twitter tonight who say he'll never have to buy a beer in the city again. So for him, PSR, I think it's going to be about pint sustainability and recovery. What you were seeing from clubs like Aston Villa, I think you had Neil Moxley's story in the back of the Daily Star. There was that there was a bomb with a cable, and we had to cut the cable in order to survive. That was the case of what they had to go through to make sure they wouldn't put themselves up for a points deduction as well. The legal implications, I guess, we're going to see how they play out, but what you're in danger of at the minute is every conversation, as Miguel said there, is PSR related, and it's getting more and more complicated for supporters to kind of follow what's going on in terms of what their club can and can't do. And obviously they're seeing Chelsea sign a lot of players and kind of push the financial situation in as clever methods as they can think of. But the danger is you're moving the game further and further away from what it's supposed to be, which is about what's happening on the pitch. For the promoter clubs, when they come into the Premier League, they're almost like a start-up business taking on multinationals, and it's very difficult for them to compete. Nottingham Forest did it and survived. Were criticised for signing players, but they stayed up. Last season, the three teams that went up went straight back down, and that's no good for the league at all. And with increased American ownership, you're thinking relegation and promotion are vital parts of English football, and you wouldn't want to lose that. There has to be some kind of compromise, I think, and we're going to move to a new rule in 2026. There has to be some scope for clubs with ambition like Newcastle and Aston Villa to spend, and for the three clubs that are coming up to make an effort to try and survive. The danger at the minute is the fans are getting increasingly tired with PSR stories, with points deduction, with a lot of football matters being sorted as today in court rather than actually on the pitch.
Miguel, what are the ramifications here? Back page of the Star, Aston thriller, PSR quote-unquote bomb nearly blew a hole in Villa's dream, reports Neil Moxley. What shape are the profitability and sustainability rules in tonight? How viable are they?
Well, the one thing I would say is the Leicester case doesn't challenge the principle of the rules. It's not like they've won on that. The issue at stake is actually more the enforcement of the Premier League's rules, and whether it is, when they do have these cases, it's not about how the rules work, but about kind of how well the rules are phrased. And it's interesting, from speaking to people in football tonight, one of the most common sentiments back to me has been that the Premier League's rules are nowhere near as watertight as UEFA's on this, and they're not perfect. But I think that's been seen in, say, reports like Martin Ziegler and Martin's paper about how kind of Chelsea will have a much bigger fight to stay within the limits for the Conference League than they would in the Premier League, especially on issues like selling assets to other companies that the owners have. But also, allied to that the Premier League, for about, I think, half a decade now, have been repeatedly advised by people to set up independent units, like, say, UEFA have in the CFCB and the EFL have. So essentially to create this separation between the two. And like the view is it does insulate the Premier League a bit and essentially prevents situations like this. But it's again, just to echo what Martin's saying there, it is remarkable we're in this situation. And obviously there's a bigger discussion to be had about PSR that always comes up at these situations. I mean, my view, I've stated on the programme before, I think financial regulation is essential to football. It's essential to organised sport, or else some clubs will always spend much more when there's no limits. And in situations like this, you do have. I mean, the reasons rules were brought in the first place was the clubs to keep up were spending so much they're going bust, or they weren't making payments, or players weren't getting paid, and that has an effect all the way down the pyramid. I mean, so my issue would be that it's not PSR that's the issue. It's the system that it sits in, where basically you have clubs that can be so much wealthier than the others. And like, there is a relevant point to that. at the very start of English football, when all these rules started to be put together in the first place, going back a century. But essentially, football clubs used to have to share gate receipts. And that was specifically because they knew that the big clubs that had huge fan bases could grow too far, as we see like with the number of titles that, say, Madrid have in Spain or Juventus have in Italy. That didn't really happen in England, and because of that. And in I suppose, the last 30 years, that's something we've seen. Obviously, we've seen the growth of the super clubs, the big six, that can grow to these financial sizes beyond anyone else. And I think that's the issue, rather than PSR itself.
Absolutely, yeah. Complicated picture, isn't it, as well? It may not ensure parity, but perhaps does ensure that clubs don't go bust at PSR. We'll discuss it at a future date, I'm sure, gentlemen. Let's talk about Manchester United, which rumbles on despite being in an international break. Back page of The Sun. Ugarte, fight for your right to party. Winner Manuel be United's battling beastie boy. Martin, do you sense there's going to be quite a pressure heaped on this defensive midfielder's shoulders come the game against Southampton after the break?
Well, Eric Ten Hag loses an awful lot of Premier League games. They've started the season poorly. I would argue that the Manchester United forward line is one of the worst that I've ever seen in 20 or 30 years. He's going to be expected to kind of knit everything together in the centre of midfield. I'm still not quite sure where Eric Ten Hag plans to play everybody else. So, was he that good at PSG? I know Dan Ashworth said he was top for tackling and was the one player that set the heart on signing. So we'll see. The one thing we have learned from Man United since Alex Ferguson left is that one signing never solves the issues they have at that football club. And I know that obviously everything is in vogue now in terms of you buy a player who's 23, 24, 25 for less than 60 million in the best years ahead of him, and he's 23. At the same time, that probably means he's not quite ready for that responsibility to drive a team that I think I was surprised Gary Neville at the start of the season was predicting them for the top four. I just can't see how they do that. I don't think they have the players to do that. I don't think they have the momentum. There's a lot on Ugarte coming into that situation, and how will he gel with Kobe Manu? At what point you still look and you think, would an Ivan Toney not have been of benefit for Man United to give them something at the top end of the field? I know, but again, he's 28, so they wouldn't do that. I think this is going to be a very, very difficult season for Manchester United. And as young players, you're going to have a lot of responsibility. They were comprehensively outplayed by Liverpool. And I think that those teams at the top bracket are somewhere away from where they want to get to. Yep,
2 defeats from 3, Miguel. Yet Eric Ten Hag has been backed by Dan Ashworth and Omar Barada. What do you make of the situation at Manchester United during this break?
Just on the backing, conspicuously, as every report, I think, made a point of saying high up, the statements came in the 3 hours before the Liverpool game. Now, to be fair, I don't think the results or the performance changed much in that sense. But I suppose it was another wake-up call. I have to say, well, first of all, in Ugarte, he will be better than Casemiro. Casemiro, once a great player, that shouldn't be forgotten. But he's at a point in his career now where it's just not happening for him. And he has been an issue in so many United games. So Ugarte will be an upgrade. But to echo something Martin said there again, he mentioned kind of one more signing. It does feel like United have been in this situation essentially for the last 7 to 10 years, where it's always one more signing, that's the key. But, for all we've talked about Casemiro there, United have had issues, and many familiar issues, in games that haven't involved Casemiro either. So it does feel like there's something more systemic here with the way they play. And in terms of, you're talking about systemic, given we mentioned there about the backing they gave Ten Hag, it still just feels that that decision they made in the summer is going to weigh over the entire season and consistently be thrown back unless Ten Hag's performances and results are excellent. And they really need to be excellent because, ultimately, we all know they came very close to sacking him, that they were talking to other managers about his job, and he was effectively interviewed for his own job. It's a very strange situation to be in. I'm kind of surprised Ineos went for that in their first big decision. Now, again, I suppose you could put some of that down to the fact that Ashworth and Barada weren't there yet. Maybe it would have been different despite their comments at the weekend. But I suppose for the moment, he does retain the club's backing. But I think they need a drastic escalation of performance. So, yeah, there is a pressure on Ugarte to fix or to fill another hole.
Yeah, we'll see a lot of tackles in any case, I think, gents, as the statistics suggest. Thank you very much for now, Martin and Miguel. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we will look at more of the back pages, including this in the Express. A dream believer, Jack Draper. Can he make the US Open semi-finals? More next. Welcome back. You are watching Back Pages tonight. It's welcome back to the Independent's Miguel Delaney and Martin Hardy from the Times. Let's go to the Metro. Martin, talk cricket with your good self. Busy Baz, the headline. England Test coach McCullum handed whiteboard job. Martin, he's been vaunted, hasn't he? He's been a brilliant coach. But how challenging time-wise will this be for a man who technically lives in New Zealand?
Well, there's still some of us who think Test cricket is by far the greatest form of the sport. So for us, it's a kind of a vindication. And, Robert Key's bent over backwards to get Brendan McCullum to take the charge of the white ball as well. England were insipid in the T20 World Cup. And that was a complete contrast to what you saw in the Test team, the kind of swashbuckling front foot version of cricket. So from that respect, it makes sense. I saw Mike Atherton talk about it earlier with Nasser Hussain, and they both went, logistically, it's going to be difficult, but he's the number one candidate by a long, long way. So you will do anything you can to make the situation work. I think there's 5 months clear at the start of next year from Test cricket. So there will be a period where we can concentrate on one-day cricket and T20 and bringing England back to kind of that 2019 level as world champions has been a big drop off since then. What's, as you alluded to there, the problem he's going to have is, and he's got a contract till 2027 now, he's in danger of spreading himself a little bit too thin. Will he exhaust himself, taking care of 3 different teams effectively? Logistically, can he combine it with living in New Zealand? That, I think, is the only issue here. In terms of everything else and kind of, competitive sport now, our top level sport, we do like to be entertained, and he's brought huge life back to Test cricket and made it, got all those brilliant elements of the game, got forceful players to the point where those last days, and with his cricket teams, it's often the third day of the Test, it becomes unmissable, which is obviously what you want in all England's forms of cricket. It's going to be interesting, the logistics. I think Marcus Trescothick will take charge of the white ball team for the series against Australia this month, which will eventually set everything up for Brendan McCullum. It was interesting when we do stories, we get comments from readers, and not all of them are favourable. But to the news of this, readers at the time said, "Can his appointment be extended to the national football team as well?" And somebody replied, "And the rugby union too." So his stock could not be any higher, and England have made a fine choice. Just hopefully he doesn't burn himself out in the process. Yeah,
wishing the best of luck with a couple of Ashes series and both World Cups as well to come in the next few years. We'll talk England football in just a second, gents, but wanted to mark this quickly. That Telegraph Sports Supplement, really serious and significant story. The fight for justice as Gus Atkinson starred for England. The man who killed his mother in horrific car crash was jailed after extradition struggle. This report by Nick Holt, chief cricket correspondent, and pictured there Gus Atkinson, his mother Caroline, and Yusuf Barouane, who pleaded guilty to causing her death. OK, let's get on to the football story. Miguel and back page of The Sun. Cole, Phil and Ollie are 3 Lions out. Cole Palmer, Phil Foden, Ollie Watkins are out of England's Nations League games. Miguel, what does this mean in terms of opportunities? Who benefits from this? Bera Eza comes to mind?
Yeah, especially given the start of the season he's had. Also, I think Jack Grealish, given he was left out of the Euros, I thought he was excellent for City against West Ham. Actually, in every moment I've seen him this season so far, he looks revitalised. And I'm really excited to see what Carsley can do with Grealish, given I think Carsley's approach is maybe more kind of attack-minded than, or people might say more modern than Southgate's. So I think it's pretty fascinating from that point of view, and really good for both Eze and Grealish. It does speak to England's strength and depth as well, that these two players are seen as having a chance in that sense. Maybe a bit of a pity for Carsley. I mean, talking about benefits or those who maybe miss out, it's a pity for Carsley himself that just as he tries to implement a new style, he is missing a player who scored in the European final for England, and obviously Foden, who's been one of the, one of the kind of the stars of the team over the last half decade. But yeah, in those particular positions at least. And it's an area I think where Carsley is very good. There is so much strength and depth.
Feels like a shame, particularly, Martin, doesn't it, for Cole Palmer? It felt like this was his opportunity with no Jude Bellingham and no Phil Foden.
Yeah, it did, and we didn't see enough of Cole Palmer in the European Championships. I hope that he plays more centrally for England and for Chelsea, because that's when he's at his best, when he has a little bit of freedom to play. The thing is, though, we're in danger of burning our footballers out. Ollie Watkins, Phil Foden and Cole Palmer were all at the Euros. Miguel's mentioned Jack Grealish having a great start of the season. Erling Haaland's had a great start of the season. They look like they've benefited from a rest. And I agree completely with Miguel. I'm glad to see Jack Grealish in there. I think he was a strange admission from the Euros, and a player, England, a team with very little control in the high end of the pitch, missed somebody that is trusted by Pep Guardiola to do that for, one of the best teams in the world. A strange admission. Glad he's back, and I'm sure he'll have a point to prove in these two games. Very interesting match in Ireland, Miguel. We'll talk about you another night as well, of course. So Grealish and Declan Rice, I know, are going to get a warm reception. Lee Carsley, a former Ireland international as well. But let's talk Jack Draper, Britain's hope in the tennis. Dream believer. How big could this be if he gets to the US Open semi-finals? We've got about 30, 40 seconds left of the show.
Massive. A player who's kind of fulfilling his talent. It's interesting. I know a few people working at the US Open, and one of the lines has been that, they don't think it's a coincidence that he has done well in maybe a cooler climate. One of the issues of his career so far has been that he can cramp up in heat, but now in this tournament, he's had a chance to, I suppose, really show his potential there. And it's massively exciting as he stands on the brink of doing something very special.
You're backing him, Martin. You've got about 10 seconds. Do you think he can beat Alex de Minaur? Live on Sky Sports, of course.
Yeah. What is he, 6'4", 22, first British male to reach the quarterfinals of the US Open since 2016. Yes, I think he's got every chance. He's got momentum. Why not?
OK, gents, very much thank you for that. Miguel Delaney from The Independent, Martin Hardy from The Times. Pleasure to have your company on Back Pages tonight as ever. We'll see you again soon. Thank you for watching. If you missed any of the show, there's another chance to see Back Pages tonight at 1:30. And remember, the show is also available as a podcast. Just download Back Pages on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And join us again Wednesday evening, building up to the Nations League action. Our guests will be Jason Burt and Riyadh Al Samurai. Once again, 10:30 p.m. for that.